Well, hello, good evening, and a very warm welcome to this little event. My name is Ciarán Hanna from inside Ireland.ie, and we're delighted to be part of the Imagine Belfast Festival of Politics and Ideas, which is taking place all this week from the 22nd to the 28th of March. And we're very grateful to the festival director, Peter O'Neill, for being able to make this festival happen, given, of course, all the restrictions that are in place across these islands. And there's 115 events as part of the Imagine Festival this week. So that's a lot of events. One of them, one day, the 23rd of March, has been set aside exclusively for events to discuss everything about the COVID-19 pandemic, the public health aspect of it, of course, then the subsequent restrictions that we were all under. So you can go online again to see all those, a plethora of events about the COVID-19 pandemic. And of course, in this aspect, we're going to sort of scratch the surface of it today in relation to something that I think that we can all possibly relate to. But before we do that, I'd just like to thank the Accidental Theatre team there, Gillian and Alan and all those that are doing the technical aspect of tonight's streamed event. I certainly, being a complete technophobe, would not have any capacity to do this, so we're very grateful to all the team there doing all the streaming. So just before the panel, just to thank everybody for joining us, all those people that are with us. There is a little Zoom chat function there if you want to make a decent comment. And there will be hopefully about 5 minutes towards the end to sort of go through any of the questions that perhaps you've asked that we haven't dealt with in the next 55 minutes or so. So feel free to ask maybe a pertinent subject to our three fact checkers. And without further eloquence, as a character in The Quiet Man once said, we can go to our three fact checkers. And first we have Christine Bohan, who is the Deputy Editor of The Journal.ie, speaking from Dublin. How are you, Christine?
Hi, everyone. How's things? Hey.
And just down the road from me, I'm just to explain where I am, I'm broadcasting from central Belfast. And down the road from me is Allan Leonard from FactCheck NI. How are you tonight, Alan?
Very good, Ciarán. Welcome, everybody. Thank you.
And finally, all the way over to England, I suppose it's London, is Claire Milne, who's the Deputy Editor of Full Fact in UK, who leads on work related to fact-checking, particularly on health and social care issues, which is particularly pertinent given our subject today. So good evening to you, Claire, who is muted. Good evening, Claire.
Hello, can you hear me now?
We can indeed.
Fantastic.
Very, very welcome, and thank you to all the panelists for agreeing to be part of today's event. Claire, if I can start with you, because I think before we get into the whole thing about the pandemic, I think it is useful for us to sort of talk about what exactly disinformation is. So I think just as a kind of a ballpark kind of a definition, what exactly is misinformation? The disinformation problem. We'll come on to misinformation in a minute. What exactly is disinformation?
So I was, the two are very linked. I always think about disinformation as almost being a step up from misinformation. So misinformation is when we're talking about things that are inaccurate, misleading. And disinformation is when there's a deliberate element to that. It's done deliberately to mislead or to try and create a false impression of something. So
disinformation is willful, whereas misinformation could be inadvertent.
Exactly. With misinformation, it might just be a simple error or mistake. Someone hasn't intended to say something wrong or misleading. But with disinformation, there's a more deliberate element, as you say.
So if disinformation then is very much about the intent, I suppose, but that wouldn't always be clear, would it? In terms of, if we take, for example, a Facebook post, it wouldn't necessarily be clear what the intention of the owner of that post is.
Exactly. It can be very difficult to try and work out what the intention of a post is, and particularly when a lot of the things that we see might be people sharing something that they've seen a friend share. It might be something that they've copied and pasted from somewhere else. So whilst it might have started out with deliberate intent to be misleading, that person might be sharing it in completely good faith. I mean, one of the things that we've seen throughout the pandemic is, people want to share information with their loved ones, their friends and family, which they think will keep them safe. That information isn't always accurate. And it's one of the reasons we've spoken so much in the last year about, tips and tricks that people can use to try and double check information, asking people to, make sure you check before you share, that kind of thing, to try and stop that spread, because it's natural that people want to share information that they think will help people. It's just not always accurate information.
Well, what are the examples? I think it's good for people to know what could constitute disinformation. One of the real examples that I particularly remembered was at the time of the UK general election, about December 2019, and it was the last week. And I think the Yorkshire Evening Post broke the story of a 4-year-old boy who was taken in with pneumonia, and there was images shared where he was asleep for a few hours on the floor on a bed of coats. And then the next day or so, suddenly there was seeds of doubt sown. People were wondering if the images were fake. And apparently the origin of all that came from a Facebook post. Now, it has to be said that the person who owned that post said that she was hacked, so she didn't. But it was a classic post. It said that my a nephew or somebody worked in the hospital, something like that, said that there was a trolley bread available, but the boy was deliberately placed by the mother to basically fake this photograph. So, I think that's a classic example of disinformation. And I remember there was an outgoing Conservative MP who then retweeted this, and his quote tweet was, "Can full stop this full stop be full stop true ? And of course, that then spread. Of course, you can imagine the thousands of followers that he had. So suddenly, that began to negate the story. And of course, the intent of the person, whoever hacked it or whoever originated the post, was, of course, to spread disinformation, because the story was seen to be bad against the Conservatives who were leading in the polls. And it was, a political thing. Obviously, we're not saying in any way that the party was involved in this, but that was the intention of person to swing back the narrative back in the favour of the Conservatives, to do damage to this potentially damaging story. And I think full fact checked that at the time.
We did, yeah, and it was one of these stories that there didn't seem to be any evidence for. There was no extra evidence provided really in the Facebook post, that other than saying, that the person posting it knew someone in the hospital, I think, which is, something that we do see. It's obviously not exclusive to posts that have mis and disinformation in them, but sort of anonymous, I know a friend of a friend that says sort of claims. So, that was one of the things that immediately sort of, as a fact checker, that raised a red flag of concern. Is there anything actually to this sort of post? So it definitely had a lot of sort of classic elements to it like that.
So at least that helps us. That's an example. So then when the outgoing Conservative MP retweeted that with that quote, could that then be said to be misinformation because the person wasn't sure if it was true or not? Or should that person not then have shared that if it wasn't sure of the provenance?
It's definitely, as I say, sort of as fact checkers, you notice these red flags. It's got things in it, that aren't evidenced. There's no further information provided. It's the kind of things that we would definitely say to people before you share. Do stop and check. That's not to say that people should never share anything on the internet again. That's obviously not a very likely scenario. But it's definitely something that we would say. Whether you are a public figure, a politician, whatever your role is, it's good practice to try and check that before you share the information. We all do have a certain level of responsibility for the information that we share as well, and what we are putting out there in the world.
Indeed. Of course, I think disinformation has been about a long time. I remember at school learning about the Zinoviev letter during the British general election in the 1920s or something. But it has been accelerated, of course, by the onset of people's using of social media apps and online video sites and things like that. That has accelerated the ease at which disinformation can travel.
It definitely makes it much easier to share things at the click of a button, rather than sort of the slower spread than if you were just before this event started, we were talking about, misinformation or information of any kind shared in leaflets through the door, that kind of thing. That's going to be a lot slower than just hitting that share button on social media. So it's definitely something that has accelerated that spread, yeah.
And given that climate, say around about 2015, 16, was this the time, Allan, that fact checking began to be needed, because of how much disinformation was spreading? Is this why people turned to fact checking?
Well, so obviously misinformation and disinformation has been around for millennia, arguably. It's kind of part of human nature about, rumors and secrecy, but contemporary fact checking has been around since about the 1980s in America, fact checking politicians' speeches and the rest. But what you say about social media accelerates the information, good information and bad information. And the concern is that it accelerates the dangers of misinformation. So before, in say pre-social media days, if there was a factual inaccuracy in a newspaper, and the newspaper would correct it the second day, and even if it spread out through the wire service, you're talking days for things to go out and to get corrected. Now, misleading claims appear all the time. And, in a sense, fact checkers are kind of that first line, if you will, of sort of, trying to catch some of these things. So, yeah, it's part and parcel, I suppose, is the short answer to that. The information's been around.
At what point did fact checking begin? For example, here in Northern Ireland, when did fact checking, and for example, FactCheck NI, when did that?
So for ourselves, we were created in 2015 on the back of some research that our co-founder and executive director, Orna Young, did, looking precisely at social media and seeing how it was being used positively and negatively. But, she looked at some of the negative impacts that the spreading of misinformation on social media was having. And so FactCheck NI was created on the back of that. And we were organized kind of on a kind of active citizen participatory democracy. We want to engage with users. We want users, because fact checkers aren't going to be able to fact check everything out there. We actually, media literacy and critical thinking is a key component of what FactCheck NI delivers, because it'll be ordinary citizens, all of us, who need to do those the critical thinking skills, just basically to up our games in regards to critical thinking that we all learn as children. But with social media, you kind of have to constantly learn how it operates, learn as you're discussing about disinformation, about how some actors purposefully want to deceive you versus people who want to help you, but the information is not accurate. So all of these things are necessary, and we've been around for 5 odd years doing our bit.
And Christine, does that correlate with the time that the Journal.ie started its fact checking? Because remember, 2015 was a very opportune time, because 2016 was the Brexit referendum, of course, and then there was the American presidential election of 2016 as well, where facts were needed, arguably.
Yeah, I was going to say facts were thin on the ground for parts of it. Yeah, we started in 2016, and it was for the Irish general election. Was the reason that we started, and I think we were quite heavily influenced by what was happening in America, in that we made the assumption that as there was this kind of dilution of facts, or this kind of stretching of facts, that we needed to be prepared if that came to Ireland, and we were expecting to see more of that in the general election. It felt like an opportune time for us to see it in Ireland, because before that we hadn't seen much misinformation. And I think we actually call that wrong. I mean, there wasn't a huge amount of misinformation around that election, or for the next couple of years. It really wasn't until COVID, until it all kicked off for us. So I think a lot of our fact checks started off being quite wonky and quite academic. Like, it was almost like we were like politely correcting the record, so you might have, the ones I always think of are, we had the Minister for Housing, and the Taoiseach came out and said that Ireland's rate of homelessness wasn't actually that high compared to other countries. So we checked that, that kind of thing. Or the Taoiseach said the average wage for someone in Ireland was 40-something thousand. So we were able to check these kind of things, and it wasn't deliberate information like you were talking about with Claire there. It was more people being a little bit loose with facts. That's what we found, because it was focused on politicians, and politicians in Ireland weren't really in the same space as we've seen, say, your Boris Johnsons, or sorry, not Boris Johnson, I'd say Donald Trump, or or the politicians perhaps affiliated with Brexit, who ended up kind of using being fast and loose with facts. And we still haven't quite gotten to that in like what we haven't seen much evidence of politicians being the ones who play fast and loose. It's been people on social media generally. That's been kind of the issue. And I'm not saying that it won't happen in Ireland, that we won't end up with with a Katie Hopkins or whoever, like people who deliberately spread mis or disinformation. But we haven't seen much of it. A lot of it has been grassroots.
Well, that takes us very nicely to 2020. Claire, and of course that was the year that was, or that wasn't, I think I view it. When did you become, certainly in full fact, when did you become aware that this coronavirus would be ripe for conspiracy theorists?
So it was sort of quite early on in the year, sort of late January, that we started really seeing claims about it beginning to emerge, things that became quite classic claims that we saw throughout a lot of last year, things about Bill Gates's involvement, things about the fact that this coronavirus had existed for many years. Look, here's a patent for the virus as evidence that it was around for a long time, whereas actually what you're looking at is, a patent for a coronavirus that exists in cows or something. It's not the coronavirus that we're talking about that has caused this pandemic. So there was a lot of early on that kind of claim that we started seeing crop up around, as I say, mid to late January, and it did very quickly get into that sort of territory of there was some kind of conspiracy going on that we saw for quite a lot of last year, a lot of claims around that.
And Allan, did that mirror what was happening in here in the north? What was it, the same kind of time scale, about January or so, that you began to get aware of it?
I think, as I recall, and we all can recall, at that just the start of the year was seeing those images coming out of Italy about the hospitals. And so there were, the rumors, but no, I didn't notice any like specific disinformation. It was just more like rumor mongering. And so, for example, some of our first fact checks were on whether a Gaelic pitch was going to be used as a field hospital, or whether the Dundonald Ice Bowl was going to be used as a temporary morgue, that kind of thing, where then we had to go and chase, like, okay, is there any kernel of truth to this? And try to chase the official sources and be able to, say, debunk the inaccuracy, but also present what the official documents were saying. So at the start for us, it was just that kind of dispelling, or I don't say correcting the rumors, but just literally just like what are the facts with what's being discussed, and not in such a malign way, but in a more have you heard kind of sense.
What about yourself, Christine, for the Journal.ie? When did you first sort of become aware that you needed to be fact checking some of the claims made?
It was definitely February of last year. That was when it really, really hit us. And I remember, like, the big thing that I noticed was that we kind of divided up into two waves. And that first wave, kind of like February, March, April, it was very much driven by anxiety and fear. And it was people sharing things on WhatsApp. More than anything else, it was people sending things to family and friends and people they knew. And it was saying, the government isn't telling you this, but the defence forces are going to have a lockdown tomorrow. You're going to be stuck in your home, stock up on water, or health cure. So that was one kind of type. The lockdown rumours, and then there were like all the health cures and all these things that were being shared by people. And I think they had good intentions a lot of the time, but it was very much not backed up by facts. It was people trying to get information to loved ones, and because they felt it wasn't being given by the government, or that they knew something that other people didn't. And I think then the second wave ended up being more based on distrust in the government. And that's when we saw more conspiracy theories and things that were just completely, you saw your rumors about George Soros and, Bill Gates, and that the government is definitely lying to you. But I think in that first wave, those first couple of months, it was very much about people trying to look out for people in their social circles. And WhatsApp was just a huge, huge vector for it, like more than we'd ever seen before or have seen since.
I remember at the end of last year, Marianna Spring from the BBC Disinformation Unit wrote a piece, about how it all began. And she had just been appointed onto the team just about a month before it all kicked off. And they looked into one particular post, which came, I think it was, and their earliest memory is about, their earliest recording of this post was about February. And it was one from a nephew, uncle in Wuhan who, that one about the, you could drink hot water and things like that.
Yeah.
Yes, and it was interesting then, there was somebody in the UK then picked it up, and this person, we'll just call the person Gavin for easiness sake. So this person then must have copied and pasted that, rather than resharing it, copied and pasted the text. So when Gavin was claiming that it was his uncle and nephew, it wasn't, because it was from the original post. So therefore, and then it got picked up an 87-year-old man who had a master's. I think it became known as the Master's Man post or something. And then that suddenly then 350,000 people then took it from that. That's the 87-year-old man. And suddenly it all just took off, and there was misleading. There was some of it, where it was truths in it, but there was a lot of misleading stuff in it. And that was, I think, for Marianna Spring, that was the first real time that they realised that there was an issue with facts. That was February. So that will take us then to in the middle of it. So the lockdown then comes in on these isles late March, and then that begins to then accelerate the rate of which these things travel. Do you think that's true? And we'll open that to anybody. Claire, did you find that then after the lockdown came in, then suddenly it just went, just was hard to control?
I think definitely from March we saw a massive acceleration in the amount of misinformation we were seeing. We went from the number of claims that we were fact checking about coronavirus and the pandemic being sort of a small chunk of what we were doing. We lots of other claims that we were fact checking at the same time, to it being basically everything that we were covering, most of what we were seeing. It was obviously what everyone was talking about. It was everything that was all over the media, so that's entirely understandable. And definitely at that point, I think partly also because people are now more removed from their families and their loved ones after lockdown started. Social media is a way that they can keep in touch, that they can, as we've said a couple of times, share information that hopefully will keep them safe. That's when certainly for us, we really started to see lots of claims about here's things that you can take to cure it. Here's how you can spot whether or not that post that you were talking about had a sort of mix of good and bad information in it about how you can spot it, to know that you've got COVID, things like that. And that's, we really saw a huge uptick around about that point.
Allan, did you find that too then, once the restrictions came in here, that sort of accelerated the rate of the transmission of these viruses?
Well, yeah, no, absolutely. But kind of as Claire was saying, for ourselves, Christine referred to it as well about, give us an election manifesto to fact check, give us, a politician's speech to fact check, give us Brexit to fact check, the gift that kept on giving. But then when the lockdowns occurred and the pandemic really took hold, it just dominated, just completely dominated. And for obvious reasons. For us, kind of the additional kind of change was that, we're FactCheck NI Northern Ireland. So, we sometimes would receive claims, oh, can you fact check this thing that Donald Trump has said or Boris Johnson has said? And we're like, well, is there relevance for Northern Ireland? Because we're a relatively small organization. We've got our colleagues, in Full Fact, and the Journal, why replicate that kind of work? So we would always be very strict about, kind of a specificity to Northern Ireland. The pandemic changed all that. I mean, you can't, your audience, our Northern Ireland audience, they want information good information on the global pandemic. So that was a pivot for us. We really had to adapt to that, and that kind of made us kind of really think about how we're going to deliver our work, what we're going to focus on. Always trying to remember our audience in Northern Ireland. But I suppose one outcome of that is I think all three of us belong to the Coronavirus Facts Alliance. So this is a kind of a global community of fact-checking organizations sharing their fact-checking work submitting all their work into this single database, which anyone in the world can go and search. And we contributed to that as others did. But that was a big change, because before then, fact-checking organizations around the world are focusing on their countries, local politics, local statistics. But this was just, it was just, like the pandemic itself came out of nowhere and dramatically changed the way that we, and I would say other fact-checking organizations around the world, kind of worked. It brought a kind of new level of collaboration, I would argue.
What kind of tweets do you think that you or what kind of things did you feel that you had to fact check? Do you remember? Was it solely based on restrictions, or was it what were the nature of the things that you felt you had to fact check?
Well, I mean, there were a variety, but like Claire said, the case of cures, medicinal tea help as a cure, is COVID-19 being put fraudulent on death certificates, and related to that, just about the death rates, that this is no worse than a flu, and those types of claims, they keep coming back, and that's interesting in the sense that no matter how many times we try to explain how the counting works and even what the excess deaths means, it's there's a sense of denial about the severity of this disease. So it comes. Those are the kinds of things that keep recurring. But I suspect Christine wanted to make a comment about the collaboration.
It was actually about the scale. Like when you were talking about it there, like the scale is the big thing I think that people need to understand, that like for fact checkers, this was just a massive wave that just hit us. And we, even like a year on, it's still impossible to fact check every single claim that people send to us or that we come across. Like I would say we fact check, I don't know, maybe, actually, I can't even estimate. Like maybe I was gonna say maybe 1 in 4, maybe 1 in 6. I'm not even sure. But like it's just, Ireland had a very, very low level of misinformation before this. And it was like someone just flicked a switch and suddenly it was there. It was just so much of it. And I think that the big question now is going to be, is this something that Ireland lives with, that Northern Ireland lives with, and that the UK has, or will things go back to normal? And for Ireland, I don't think Ireland's going to go back to normal, because now we've seen people kind of chaos mongers, or professional kind of agents of chaos, or people who kind of deal in what would you say, kind of adding false news or bringing false news, or bringing kind of murkiness to what's actually going on. So like Allan was saying, like at the start we saw a lot of people, we'd seen claims about, say, health issues or things that were very straightforward to debunk. You could say that no, cutting an onion in half and leaving it in your house will not prevent you getting coronavirus. That was fine. But now what we're seeing is much more technical and more difficult to debunk, and it takes a lot more time and energy from fact checkers to have to do it, and there's a lot more people trying to spread this misinformation as well. So I just feel like, even once the pandemic is over and it's all done, there are still these people who've built up these communities where they profit, or where they are able to share this misinformation, and they're not just going to disappear and stop doing it. Something else will happen, and I think it's likely that they will cling to that as well, and that's going to be the big challenge for fact checkers, like dealing with this just increased volume. And I think cooperation is going to be a big part of that, because we're seeing the same issues pop up again and again, but also just resources. Fact checkers need more fact checkers. Like every fact checker will say that to you. We need more people doing this, which I think is important.
Karen, if I may add, I mean, Christine from the north here, we've seen that physically manifest in the south. I mean, we have similar issues here about some of the groups that we're here to deal with, but from what we've witnessed, some of the protests and just even attacks on fact checkers, it's astonishing, kind of what we've witnessed in the south,
Yeah, we went from, you know, what I was saying, like our nerdy fact checks about, you know, very technical, wonky things, to having like 200 protesters turned up outside our door in September. And like, I cannot describe what that was like as a journalist, just to see these people turning up, criticizing your work like that. And not criticizing your work, trying to intimidate you and stop you from doing your work. And I would never have said that that would have happened in Dublin. You know, that was just not on the table at all. And then to see it happen just felt like, oh, we're actually closer to America, or closer to a place where there is bad information being shared than we ever realized, or that we ever thought would be possible. And it's scary.
I think just before we maybe try to get some examples of the kind of posts that people got, I think just Christine, just to for example, when I at the time I went on the journal's site, you know, at the time last March, and a lot of the things that you were fact-checking, I had no idea that that people were saying this. I don't be on the kind of forums that, you know, WhatsApp, you know, those kind of things that maybe people were. But I was just wondering, it struck me, I wonder, do you think there's a danger that by highlighting this, you're also then highlighting a post that perhaps, given the publicity, that it didn't deserve?
That's a conversation we have almost every single time we do a fact check. Are we amplifying a claim that otherwise would only have been seen by 100 people? And like the journal, like our readership is large. We've over 500,000 readers a day, and like an average article will get 50,000 people reading it. So if we do an article about if we do a fact check and 50,000 people read it, and then suddenly we've brought this claim to an audience that maybe would not have seen it before. So yeah, we wrestle with that all the time, and I would say probably it's a big determining factor in whether or not we do something. So we've turned down a lot. We've said we won't do a lot of fact. It's probably the single most common reason why we will not do a fact check, because there is that danger of amplifying a claim that we shouldn't be. And I think of that particularly in the case of people like Gemma O'Doherty, who is kind of a former journalist and now I suppose full-time peddler of misinformation, is probably the best way to put it, where we frequently have decided to pull back and not fact check her, because it's first of all, it's bringing her to a wider audience, but also it gives her ammunition, because then she's able to say, look what the mainstream media is doing. You know, we don't want to be used as a target, I suppose, from these people to say, look what the mainstream media is doing, they're fact checking us, go turn on them, go and fight them, or whatever, you know, and to kind of polarize things even more. So I think you have to pick your battles. Like the one example I can think of that we did do, and we got criticized for it, but we felt it was important, was there was a message being shared widely on Facebook, which was it was actually a WhatsApp message shared on Facebook, but it was a woman saying that microchips were going to be put into the arms of school children in Ireland, and was telling people to be concerned and, you know, to get your kids out of school or whatever. And it's such an outlandish conspiracy theory. It's so outlandish, we wouldn't normally have done it, but it was actually being shared so widely, and it was being shared among a particular group of people. It was being shared among travellers in Ireland. So we were trying to get it back to the audience of people who were sharing it. We were trying to say to them, here's the right information. Here's, you know, maybe they could share that among their groups and then hopefully get the correct information out there. That's one example where we did kind of weigh up the balance of amplifying versus debunking, and went with, actually, I think it was more important to do it, despite the pushback we got. But I would still stand by the decision to do that fact check. And
so just to give us an idea of the process involved in that, so how did you then, you know, the team, how do you decide what to do then? You know, where does it come to you that you see it to then decide if you're going to fact check it or not? We ask. So we've got a kind of a checklist we go through every day, where we check Facebook, we check Twitter, we check like social media platforms, and we look at what's trending in Ireland, what's popular in Ireland, particularly among groups that, or pages and groups that frequently share misinformation. So we kind of compile a potential list every day of what we could fact check. And we also ask readers to send us potential things that they've seen that they're not sure about, so either on Twitter or by email. And out of all of that, you kind of have this a list, and then we prioritize it, and we base the decision on what to fact check on how widely something is being shared. Like, you know, are we able to bring the good information to the people who are sharing this? And then also, does it have the potential to do harm? So if it's being shared by 20 people and it's not that big, you know, it's so outlandish that no one will ever believe it, then we're probably not going to do it. But if it's somebody saying something like, you can stop yourself getting coronavirus by injecting bleach into your arm, and it's being shared by loads of people, then we will fact check that, because of the idea, the potential there is for someone to actually
be harmed by it, by the misinformation.
Okay, that's very, very useful. Thank you. Claire, in terms of, we'll maybe talk about the kind of posts then, the kind of things that you had to deal with. Is there any example that you can remember from that period that is a classic example of disinformation?
There were so many. One of the things that particularly stuck out to us from that sort of earlier part of the pandemic, with the kind of mis and disinformation we were seeing a lot of things that we had previously fact-checked before the pandemic started, that had been circulating in much smaller circles online, that suddenly just blew up, became attached to the coronavirus, to things about the pandemic. So one of the things that we saw a huge amount of early on was this idea that 5G was causing the coronavirus, and that was what it was about. Obviously, we ended up seeing that escalate. It ended up 5G masts were being set on fire and vandalized. So it really sort of was a demonstration of, exactly as Christine was saying, the real world harm that these misinformation and disinformation claims could do. And that was something that just had no basis. In fact, 5G is not what's causing the pandemic. So that one definitely stuck out quite a lot for that reason, because you saw that sort of beginning to end, sort of starting out as this niche thing online, right through to those real world dangerous effects of that. So that was definitely one that stuck out quite a lot in the memory. Yeah.
I don't think it took off as much in Ireland. Sure, didn't Christine and Allan? I don't think that the 5G thing was as big as it was over in England.
It was pretty big. I mean, it was definitely one of the big themes. I know Full Fact did a really interesting report looking at misinformation that was seen in different countries in Europe. And 5G popped up in I think it was Spain, Italy, England. It was whatever the 5 countries were. And I remember reading that report being like, oh, we had that. That was here too. And we actually did see it. We didn't see too much direct action, I don't think. In our, it didn't come out into the real world where people were like attacking 5G masts or anything. But there were Facebook groups that existed already that were against 5G, and so they were kind of mobilized and they were talking about it. But then you saw new Facebook groups starting up specifically to deal with the 5G issue too. So it was like the two sides they were both mobilized. So there was kind of a big willing audience for that.
In Northern Ireland, we didn't come across 5G stations, but we had a couple of base stations that were destroyed by fire. So it was like in the mood. The atmosphere was there. They just probably couldn't find enough 5G stations, but it was in the atmosphere. But I want to go back to, if I may, just something that Christine said about groups, and amplification, because we that's part of our thought process as well. So we have to think very carefully about that, and also too, who's going to read this? Christine mentioned about some of the issues about the traveling community. And for us, one thing that we did, we had a partnership with a community-based health literacy organization in Northern Ireland called the Community Development and Health Network. And that was very exciting for us because it enabled us to do our work, provide mainly explainer articles that were being delivered to their network, their users. So I brought a kind of an immediate connection, or more immediate connection, or less indirect connection with the work that we were doing and the recipients. Because sometimes it can be hard to gauge who's reading this stuff. Is it having any impact? So that was really new and innovative, and very helpful for both parties. A lot of lessons from that. But I just wanted to underline the point about the amplification in the groups. Your message, who's it being delivered to? So it's something that that we couldn't have predicted. We've had conversations before about trying to go into partnerships with organizations, and they get scared by fact checks in case there's some conflict of interest. But with us, it was the explainer articles were something that we wanted to do, particularly in the more complicated issues, that there wasn't just straight true or false, but we definitely needed to get that information out to the right audiences.
What was the most kind of things, Allan, that you felt that kind of rumors or conspiracy theories that were circulating in the North here that you felt that you had to explain?
Well, the vaccines, really. A lot came out with the vaccines. So things about, mentioned microchips, mandatory vaccination. I know Full Fact covered that as well. I mean, that came on our radar. And really, you know, kind of the sensitive ones about fertility and pregnancy in the vaccine, and whether there were aborted fetuses were either in the vaccine or used in the vaccine. So we quickly realized, yeah, this isn't going to be a straight true or false. And so
so just to cover for Full Fact, I think it was the 5G thing, but in Northern Ireland, it didn't really take off as much until the vaccines came in. Was that your experience, do you think?
Yeah, it was more of just things like, what does lockdown mean? You know,
right.
and you're trying to explain kind of like what's going on. But for us, it wasn't so much of the kind of organized campaign that others have experienced. That's
interesting, isn't it? Just the difference. Just one more point just before we go into talk about vaccines, Christine. I wonder, what you did mention WhatsApp. Is that the medium you think that these kind of disinformation traveled the most in? Or obviously there was Facebook and things like that, but certainly WhatsApp seems to have been the medium that these seem to transmit more, in my experience anyway.
Definitely. In February and March of last year in particular, like I was getting some from friends and family, like my mom would send me, you know, once be like, I'm not sure if this is true. You know, she wasn't trying to spread misinformation, but it was more of a sense of trying to help or trying to do something about it. But I think then a lot of it went back to Facebook. Which people kind of think of as the natural, you know, the kind of the originator of false news. And it has gone back there now. That's where we're seeing almost all of the misinformation being shared now is on Facebook.
Is that so?
Yeah, and it's, you know, and it's a tough one. But I think the thing I'd be concerned about is the amount of misinformation that's being shared on private groups now, or in places where we just can't see them. So when it was being shared on WhatsApp, it was still being shared with, you know, probably everyone who's in this chat probably got at least one message saying something like that on WhatsApp. But I mean, I haven't got a message like that on WhatsApp in months now. And I wonder how much of that is going to, say, to Telegram, or to or is being shared on BitChute, or which obviously is a public kind of right-wing version of YouTube, so it can still be seen. But it's more that it's moving away from the very popular social network, so it isn't seen as much by mainstream people as by mainstream media users, but it's really activating the small group of people who are on it, and they're very engaged, and they're just seeing a lot of this misinformation. So I think that's my concern. So much of it's on Facebook, but what are we not seeing that's kind of lurking below the surface now among people who are very organised and very receptive to what's being said?
Thanks. Claire, just as a final kind of a point, just the thing about disinformation is it essentially, you know, can we live with it generally, but in the case of this pandemic, it's slightly different because it might damage public health messaging and therefore become dangerous, essentially?
I mean, I think, you know, bad information can harm people's lives, whatever it's about. I think that is particularly obvious and particularly pressing during a pandemic such as the one that we're currently in. You know, Christine's spoken already about, you know, claims like injecting bleach and things. Those kinds of things, you can completely see how they would become a real world harm that can cause damage very, very quickly. And I think for that reason, it's why it's such a pressing issue for fact checkers and for everyone to try and limit that spread of mis and disinformation.
We'll maybe come to vaccinations, but just before that, Christine, you did talk about the protests, and I wonder, you know, why do people protest then? Is it because that they believe that what those conspiracy theories are, that's the truth, and you're undermining their truth? Or what, you know, for example, those people that protested outside the Journal, were they all people who disagreed with the fact checking, or was there like a wider kind of a element to it?
It actually was quite narrow. It was over one specific fact check that we did. It was a claim that was made by a former, he ran for election a couple of times here for a very small political party, and he's been very organised in using his Facebook page to kind of be like a fulcrum or a gathering point for people who are angry at the government and angry at how coronavirus has been handled. And we fact check a claim that he made about deaths by suicide in Ireland, and he immediately, like almost immediately, did a Facebook Live by himself outside the office, and kind of galvanize, kind of trying to organize his supporters and get them to kind of see us as the bad guys. And it was, I think, 2 days later that 200 people turned up outside our office, mainly led by him. And he was very specific. I think it was because he, got people to do it. It wasn't like a general anti-fact-checking thing. It was based on that one fact check that we did. And then it kind of led to a sense that the mainstream media were bad because of this fact check, if that makes sense. It was like kind of correlation, causation. And it was actually a Saturday when the protest happened. So I don't think there was anybody in our office at the time, which was good. But it was just, I suppose it just showed the level of distrust of the media that is out there as a result of this. And also just that people were not just sitting at home being angry about this, that they were willing to take action and go out onto the streets about it, which I think was the big shift. Yeah.
Well, of course, just as all the disinformation ground wasn't fertile enough, then we had, of course, when the COVID vaccines were developed and eventually approved in the UK in early December, and then late December, when the EMA approved the Pfizer vaccine for the EU and, of course, the Republic of Ireland, and then, of course, then it all took off. Claire, was there any particular video post or surprise that surprised you about the vaccinations, about how audacious it was? We talked about the microchips, the DNA claims and things like that. Was there anything that you particularly noticed about the anti-vaccination posts?
So I think one of the things that we've sort of touched on already as well, that I particularly noticed with the posts that we were seeing about vaccines, is that they tended to fall into two camps. There were the ones that had some grain of truth going on there somewhere, and either deliberately or by accident it had wandered away from that initial grain of truth. And the ones that were much more outlandish, they were more in the sort of conspiracy theory territory. And those were the ones where we were seeing claims that, Bill Gates was planning to put microchips in the vaccines, for what end slightly unclear often in these posts, that there was some element of financial gain or population control going on. We've seen lots of sort of claims like that. We were seeing, even last summer, when the vaccines were still in the trial stage, we were seeing completely unfounded claims that trial participants had died, which weren't based on any information that was accurate at all. So we've seen lots of different claims that just aren't based on any particular evidence. And then there is this other body which is slightly based in some of the science around the vaccines, but there's some misunderstanding happened along the way there as well.
Just to let people know, we will be taking, I see some of the questions and little pieces there along in the Zoom chat, so I'll pick them out in about 5 minutes or so. We'll go through it. But just to finish this point on vaccinations first, Allan, you said that for you anyway, trying to explain for FactCheck NI, it really exploded when the vaccinations were developed and approved.
Yeah, in fact, just listening to Claire there, one that comes to mind is about the safety of the vaccines, because how quickly they were produced. And, anecdotally, I even had, friends, professional friends query this. And so we had to do the research and sort of learn about how the vaccines in the UK were all being produced, and how it was unusual or atypical, but that no corners were cut. But we published an article to spell this all out. And that gets to your point too, about conspiracy theories. It can be based on, just genuine concerns. Your first question, Kieran, about misinformation and disinformation. People want answers to the questions in their head, and the human brain will find those answers. So you some of the motivation for our work is to try to provide a healthy context, to try to find the best information that we can, because if we don't, individuals will walk around and fill their heads with the most convenient things that satisfy their beliefs. So yes, vaccines really kicked it off for us, and challenging, in regards to learning all these new things about vaccines. I smile because it's a fact of life for fact checkers that when you deep dive into a claim, you end up learning things you never thought you were going to learn about a particular topic, and it just comes with the territory. But then to try to take all that and write it in an accessible way for a general audience.
I think for a lot of people in Northern Ireland, the sort of the theory or the conspiracy or whatever was about dead fetuses being used in the testing of the vaccine and things like that. I think that was the one that I think prompted the Department of Health even to come out and make a statement.
No, you're absolutely right, and this audience attending tonight can appreciate the sensitive issue of pregnancy terminations and all of that. So that's already there. I mean, that's our local context, and then you introduce the facts about how vaccines are tested and produced. It's a very sensitive topic that has to be handled appropriately. So again, all the more reason we, as an editorial team, we made a quick decision. This is an explainer, because we saw lots of others just do it as a fact check, and we thought, yeah, well, we've got the evidence, we could do it as a fact check. We thought, yeah, but then we know kind of the beliefs that our audience have. I mean, if you're fervently opposed to abortion under any circumstances, if we just come out with a fact check, just sort of say, oh, that's just false, it's not manufactured with any fetal cell lines. And I say, yeah, but it's tested as such. So all of these things. So we thought, it's just best if we just have one article that kind of explains the process, what is true and what's not true. And as we always say, leave it to our readers to decide. If ideologically they have objections, that's fine, but we wanted to present information that they could make those decisions.
And Christine, what about, thanks Alan, for the journal then, I take it you just went hell for leather then once the vaccinations were developed?
Yeah, we did. But I think we also have to bear in mind, and Alan kind of touched on it there as well, about like how we communicate this to the audience, because, there are some people who are vaccine skeptics or, anti-vax, and they're just never going to, they're not really the audience. They're not going to have their minds changed, and they're not going to be paying that much attention to what we're doing. But for vaccine hesitant people who have genuine questions, just because someone has questions doesn't mean that they're wrong. And I think that's a really important thing. For fact checkers, you want to make sure that, you're being accessible, and that, that your work is landing with people, and it can potentially make a difference, or, you're giving people the information that they need to make up their mind. So I think for us, a lot of it was about how do we communicate this to people in a way that tells them what they want to know without preaching or without, wagging a finger at them for even asking the question in the first place. And because there was so much misinformation being shared, and some of it was outlandish, some of it was very extreme, and then some of it was based on, for example, some of the issues that have been arising with AstraZeneca, where there was misinformation being shared, but I think a lot of it was coming from the confusion over the messaging, around what was happening with AstraZeneca. So we've tried to just get the information out there. I think that's the best fact checkers can do. With a lot of
thank you. I'll take a few questions here, and then at the end we'll maybe have a brief advice, if you have advice for people in sharing information. But we'll have a look here. David said that there's an interesting piece in this week's Private Eye on Amazon suggesting bad algorithms promoting vaccine misinformation, but Amazon is just showing you the best sellers, in inverted commas. And question for the panel here from Caesar: is mainstream media part of the misinformation problem, or is it mainly a social media problem? Are all social media as problematic, or can you single out specific platforms? Of course, we have sort of touched on this a slight bit, but I don't know, Claire, do you want to maybe just talk briefly about the social media aspect of it? Or well, you can see the chat there. Are all social media as problematic, or can you single out specific platforms?
Facebook.
So it's interesting, actually, that, the different experiences that we've had in terms of, WhatsApp, Facebook, that kind of thing. We definitely saw more WhatsApp than we normally do in the early part of the pandemic. We were seeing videos sort of claiming to be hospitals in different parts of the UK, which were actually videos of hospitals in various parts of South America. Actually, there's a few videos. So it definitely was a more prominent platform for us. I don't think there's necessarily one I would pinpoint at this point. What we're seeing more of is things from all platforms being shared across them also. A little bit of what Christine was saying earlier, we're seeing links from, Telegram, from Facebook on WhatsApp, from YouTube and various other video platforms that have popped up, being shared in lots of different places. So I don't think from our experience I would pinpoint one particular platform. I'd say it's more there's sort of a web of different things going on with things being shared across all platforms that it makes it much more challenging as fact checkers to sort of keep on top of and work out where something started to target your fact checking effort.
A question from Al Zahara Hanif. Can we explore the intersections between populism and disinformation? Christine, maybe you?
I think we need a whole new hour just to discuss that. I think, you know, we are definitely seeing that here in Dublin in terms of people kind of taking populist narratives around coronavirus and using it to build a following. And I think it's kind of become a way for people to build, you know, to get a large group of people to pay attention to them. And I'm not sure it's to what end, you know, like for the people who have set up Facebook pages or who are peddling in this misinformation, I don't know if their goal is to run for election. I don't know if their goal is to monetize their pages and they just want it to be a commercial thing. I don't know if they just want fame, you know, and I think that's a big question. I don't think there's one answer for every person who's doing this. But I think we will be seeing that in the next couple of years. Like I wouldn't be surprised to see people running in the next, you know, general election, even though it's, you know, a few years away. But I wouldn't be surprised to see people capitalizing on the following that they've built up, for example, from this. And they will use coronavirus and then they'll jump to another issue and always be being seen as the voice of the people in some way, the people who aren't being represented or spoken for. So that'd be kind of a concern I would have about how that would work.
Thank you. Finally, Claire, have you any advice for people if they get a post or something on WhatsApp or Facebook or any of the things that we've mentioned there about what to do with this information?
Yes, definitely. So a couple of things I mentioned at the start. So to circle back neatly, things like looking to see is there a link? Is there any evidence? Is there anything you can go and check out further, or is it just sort of a vague? A friend of a friend told me this, that kind of thing, and just going and doing a little bit more digging yourself. Look and see what, particularly in a pandemic at the moment, what health bodies are saying. For us here, what is the NHS saying? What is the World Health Organization saying about this particular topic? Is there any more information that I can find from health bodies like that? That's definitely some of the first things that I would suggest, but always just sort of pause, take a little step back before you believe it or hit that share button, and just, you know, do a little bit more digging yourself before you do that.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, we can only just about scratch the surface of the debate. It is a huge topic, as I'm sure everybody can appreciate. And thank you very much for your points in the chat there. Perhaps this time next year we'll have a live full event, 2 hours event, question and answers. That's something to dream about. But for now, thank you very much to our panelists, Christine from the Journal.ie, Allan Leonard from FactCheck NI, and Claire Milne from Full Fact UK. Thank you very much indeed, and thank you to you all for being with us this evening. Again, thanks to the technical team there, Alan, and for Peter O'Neill and all the work that they've done, and Gillian and Accidental Theatre for the technical. There is a very similar event, Alan. You're
yes. If I may, if we're still live, this Thursday, 7 p.m., we're going to be speaking with Angie Holland at PolitiFact about fact-checking during the U.S. presidential elections. It should be great. We've got Alan O'Kane and Leona O'Neill. So I encourage you to attend. It'll be a great conversation. That question about populism and misinformation, check in on Thursday and ask those questions, and again.
Indeed. And of course, the Imagine Festival continues until the end of the week. Thank you very much indeed. We'll hopefully see you next year for a live event. Imagine that. All the best to you. Good night.